From Cali to Tally, it's time to wake up. WarChant.com is your ultimate Seminole sports source, and this is Wake Up War Chant. Now here's WarChant.com's Aslan Hudjavandi and Corey Clark.
Wake up! What's up, everybody? It's Wake Up War Chant, part of the WarChant.com family. Use the promo code WarChant30 for 30 free days of access to the ultimate Seminole sports source. Also, if you could, hop on to WarChant.com. Leave your questions for the Renegade Express. We'll get to that tomorrow. Your questions, our thoughts and opinions. Subscribe, rate, review, do all the good stuff for the podcast. Tell a friend. And be nice to Corey on social media. Just uplift him, give him messages of encouragement. Tell him how much you enjoy his work, because I certainly do. Corey, how are you?
I am good, buddy. I'm good. How are you doing? Good day? Good. Did you have a good Tuesday?
Yeah, man. Baseball game was only a shade over 3 hours. Got home, before too late, and watching a little Game 7 hockey. Some basketball on the tube, hanging out with you. What else would you want on a Tuesday in the middle of April?
It is well, I guess it's Wednesday when people are listening to this, but
Right.
Yesterday obviously was Tuesday.
Yes.
Are we ever going to bring back Tender Tuesday? I know Stephanie's a big fan of it.
Yeah. So, I haven't had anything really that exciting. So my girlfriend broke up with me a few months ago, everybody.
I didn't mean to start that.
No, that's
you
fine.
didn't have to divulge that.
Well, no, people probably want, they think like I'm a swinger or something like that, or like I'm not a one-woman man. I am a one-woman man.
Oh, well, that's a good point. Yeah. My fault.
So she broke up with me. She broke my heart. I've been miserable. I don't know I wonder if, can you tell? Have I been worse to deal with the last 2 months, Corey?
You've always been pretty bad to deal with.
Right.
So yeah, I guess a good degree, a couple of degrees maybe.
Okay.
It's not overly noticeable. But we did have, I want to say Linda, but that might not be right. One of the women at the event in Jacksonville, the Tiger Booster Stop, actually brought that up.
It was Linda. She's like, we
was
haven't
it?
heard
And
about
I'm like, you know what? That's funny, but not funny. But it's like, yeah, the people do like listen to us enough that they feel like they're invested in our lives, and then all of a sudden we stopped. Like people would notice if I stopped talking about Stephanie.
Right. Right.
So yeah, you just forget. You forget. I don't say you. I mean, we forget that sometimes. Like, just how much people, kind of. I don't know if care is the right word, but I think Linda was genuinely concerned.
Oh, they're curious. People are curious. I remember listening to headlines and you slowly stop talking about Shannon. I remember thinking, I'm like, I wonder what's going on there. I meant to almost even text Ira one time, and I'm like, that's really not my business. But here I am talking. Well, I was dating her for 6 months. I wasn't married to her. I didn't create the world's most awesome kid, so it's a little bit different.
Right. No, you didn't.
A little bit different. No, man. It's. I haven't had I've had I'm getting. I just got to stay in the batting cages, Corey. Just got to keep taking some hacks, stay fresh whenever I get the call up to the big show.
Right.
But I haven't really had any big-time dates. There's been a couple funny things that have happened, though, and some pet peevish things. Should we get to – I don't know. I feel I guess I should talk about it now instead of positioning back. But we're going to talk about recruiting, at least in historical terms. Corey and Gene sat down and hashed out – what they think. Did you guys actually rank the best recruiting class, or did you just talk about the metrics that you're using and how it came about?
Talked about we talked about the metrics, and mainly we talked about the classes that are mentioned in the first thing that's actually running today, which is the ones that missed the cut, like the ones that aren't in the top 5 but were really big classes. And mainly we focused on 77, 85, and 2010 because those were enormous classes for the program, but they didn't quite have the talent that the other classes that finished ahead of them did. But obviously nobody can dispute how important 2010 was. Same thing with 85. It started the dynasty. And same thing with 77 because that started Bowden's run. And, 3 years later, they were undefeated. And that was all because of the 77 team. Well, not all, but largely.
Right.
So that's what we talk about. It's good. It's entertaining, though. You're talking to because, I don't hesitate to say this. Out of the media that's in the Florida State beat, I'm not saying we're the best, although people, come on.
I'll say it. We're the best. Carry on.
But when it comes to Gene and I can't imagine anybody else in the Florida State. In fact, I know it. They don't have the working historical knowledge of the program like we do. He's been covering it forever. He started going to school in 1985 at Florida State. my first game at Florida State was 1983. So we've been with this program now for good grief, are we old? So, yeah, we can talk. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, names from the past and how Florida State kind of became Florida State, it's a pretty interesting 25-minute listen.
No way. Gene went to here in 85?
That's what he said. He said he enrolled because we were talking about the 85 class and how important it was. And he said that's when he enrolled in at Florida State. Man, because I asked him if he had any classes with Dion. He said he didn't, but his roommate did.
He's like the white Leonard Hamilton, man. He's looking good for his age.
Yeah, I look much older than he does.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Apparently I'm 8 years younger.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that. Or actually, yeah, Corey and Gene will finish off with that. We'll mention a little bit about baseball. We'll even do a little sneak preview almost. I wanted to ask you something that there's already 2 questions about it on the Renegade Express, so it'll be almost a little bit of a teaser. So, yeah, I probably should talk about my dating life on Thursdays because that's better, Tinder Thursdays. But anyhow, so, yeah, nothing really crazy has happened. Been on some dates. The weirdest thing that's happened is I went out with a girl and had drinks with her. And when you go out on these dates with these girls, they're always like they text a friend to let them know, okay, he's okay, like I'm not going to get killed, right. Which is like somewhat funny. It's not funny, obviously, because of things. But for me, I'm a guy.
There's a reason they do that, which is not funny. But right. I'm sure it's funny to see in person.
Right.
Knowing that you're not going to kill her.
Exactly. I mean, like the last thing on my mind is inflicting harm to somebody that like I'm going on a date with. But apparently guys like to do that. Stop doing that. You're ruining it for everybody else. Right. I should probably mark that down to edit. So anywho, I tell her, I'm like, after, like 5-10 minutes, I'm like, feel free to go ahead and text your friends and let them know you're going to be okay or whatever. She's like, oh, no, I don't have to do that. They know already. And I'm like, excuse me? She's like, and she turns over and she points to a table like 10 feet away. She's like, those are my roommates right there. And there was like 4 women. They were She's like, well, they're working too. But she's like, yeah, they also came here to chaperone me. But she's like my age. She's like 33, I think 34. And I'm like, dang, like your friends are here. And then after we were done with the drink at the one place, we ended up going to another bar, and as I was closing out my tab, one of her friends comes up to me, who I think she was probably a little bit, she was in like her 40s. She was like in her mid or late 40s. And she comes up and hugs me, and she's like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy that you're here. And I'm like, I don't even know who you are. You don't even know who I am. You don't even know how the last 25 minutes went with me having a drink with your friend, but that was a little bit weird. Like I didn't feel too comfortable after that. I'm like, I've talked to her. We've exchanged text messages. She's my Game of Thrones girlfriend. Like I pretty much just text her about Game of Thrones stuff. There's not like a lot of romance left in that. She's like, she works for a legislator up here, so she doesn't live here full time. So, the big guy over here trying to crank out kids can't be having a part-time mistress or whatever. So.
Sure, but I will say to me, it's pretty endearing that her friends care that much about her.
Yeah, it's a good sign, right? It's good.
Yeah, I feel to me that's a really good sign that they want to make sure she's okay, but that she obviously is a nice enough person that she has at least. I don't know if any of my buddies, if I was in a similar predicament, would be like, yeah, we'll go sit at a table next to you and watch it. No. They'd be like, dude, I mean, I know it's a different experience because I'm a man, but still, I think that's pretty, to me, that's telling that she has friends that care that much. They would even give you a hug.
Right.
I think you might want to play the long game there, buddy. I don't know that you want to punt so soon. That to me is an encouraging sign.
Yeah, probably not. Thanks though. Anyways, champ.
All right. I tried.
And then
I tried unnamed Game of Thrones lady.
I don't even want to say I have a prospect, but I'm on one of the other apps, and this girl is gorgeous. Like, probably outkick my coverage on it. This is the thing, man. It's crazy the amount of girls that literally I have just hit an absolute dead end within like the first 5 minutes of a conversation. I will leave it alone for a few months, and then I will go back. I mean, this is like before I met my girlfriend. Like, I would go back like 3 months after I had stopped talking to a girl and just message her, and then hit it off and then get a drink with her and then take a couple hacks at the batting cages. And dude, this girl's smoking hot, but like it went from like it's Bumble, so she's got to message you first. So she's like messaging me first, like all flirty, like kissy face. Hey there, how are you? And then like it just went to complete nothingness within like me sending 3 messages, because your guy gets, it's like 11 in Omaha. I get a little tight. When they're really super hot.
Right. Understood.
So I need to kind of like relax and find my swing. But yeah, maybe I'll revisit things with that young lady here. But otherwise, I will keep you all abreast of my dating life, at least the funny stories. I'm not going to go on a blow-by-blow of the mundane minutia of it all. But ultimately, the goal is to find the woman of my dreams or whatever. Maybe I'll go on Bachelors.
What do you think the odds are we're doing this show when you find the love of your life that you end up marrying? 70%?
Yeah. The funny thing is this: when I lived in Tallahassee, I used to drive by the stadium, and where we enter the media, there actually used to be a sign above it that said "media entrance." And I remember I would drive by it all the time, and I'm like, because my thing is like I wanted to be on ESPN, I want to be like national guy or whatever, but I didn't realize the scope and the breadth of all that. So when I would drive by, I would see it, and I would just kind of say to myself, I'm like every day. I'm like, my goal in life is I want to walk through those doors for my job. I'm like, I want my job to be walking through those doors every day. And then I also remember like talking to my friends and like, joking around, because a lot of them were dated girls seriously in college. Had these real serious girlfriends, but none of them married those girls. They all ended up dating and marrying other women. And I'm like, I'm not leaving Tallahassee until I find a wife. I'm like, if I can't find a wife in this city, I'm like, then there's no hope for me. But that's when I was like 23 years old, and there's 20,000, of women in my demographic. Now that number has shrunk greatly because I'm an old man. But it is funny that now I find myself entering that door 6-7 times a year as part of my job, and I am here now after 4 or 5 circuitous stops and still looking to like have a wife and all that sort of stuff. So I think it'll happen. Because I don't plan on leaving here anytime soon, and I plan on tricking a woman into giving me a kid. So,
well, there you go.
Yeah, that's why she left me. Everybody, she said she didn't want kids, even though I told her on the first date, and pretty much every single day after that, that's what I wanted. Apparently, she thought I was bluffing her. Actually, that's probably going too personal. She's great. I miss her. Let's talk about the baseball team.
Sure.
9-8 winners over Stetson.
Yep.
4 errors, 4 atrocious errors, I think, or at least 2 of them for sure were just absolutely atrocious.
Describe them to me. I didn't see them.
Okay, Nander DeSadas is playing second. He backhands one, or actually no, he's charging to his left, so he's running towards the first base bag, and he fields it cleanly. And there's a runner on first who's already making his way to second, so he's just going for the easy out. And he, for some reason, underarm flips it, out of his glove hand. He underarm flips it to first base, but he throws it up into the moon. I've never seen somebody underhand something so absurdly high. And it goes over Nico Baldor's head at first base. And then actually, DeSadas had a second error where he also, then this time he backhanded one and then just threw it wide of Baldor. Baldor probably, I actually thought Baldor should have almost been credited with the error on that one, but they said that he threw it wide, so they said E4. So the error was on DeSadas again, so I'm pretty sure DeSadas had 2 of them. And then there was one where it was an oppo slicing hit to the right field line, and it was going to the right field corner. And I don't know if it was Reese Albert in right field. I don't know. I shouldn't have said that, but whoever it was over pursued it, like pretty much ran into the bleachers and then had to stop and then like come back, and it hit off their glove, and it became like a leadoff double. And pretty much every single error, like again, this team is like the 2014 Florida State football team where Jameis just keeps throwing picks and turning the ball over. And you would always make that joke on headlines about, well, just because they turn the ball over doesn't mean you have to let them score. And
right.
These errors led to runs. I mean, I think one of the DeSadas errors ultimately led to a 3-run home run that Kwiatkowski surrendered and made it a ball game again when it looked like Florida State was kind of cruising. So it happens. 11 was asked about after the game, and he had a pretty funny comment about the fact that obviously he realizes what's going on. he's got. I don't want to make the young men any more miserable than they already feel after they commit an error. But he's like, as a coach, you kind of stop and think to yourself, are we coaching enough? Are we doing enough? Are we practicing these situations enough? And then he pauses for a second or two and he says, yeah, I mean, we are. So I really don't, pretty much like puts his hands up and like, I don't know what else I can really do as the coach except try to keep encouraging these kids. But they did win, which is a good thing. They're now up to 25 wins on the season. It's a 9-game homestand. They'll play Stetson again on Wednesday at 4 p.m. Antonio Velez, I think, that's who they wanted to start on Wednesday, but he actually ended up coming into the game, I think, in the 8th inning. And he got 2 outs, but then surrendered a double, and they pulled him. And so he threw 12 pitches, I think. But Martin told us after the game that it sounds like he still probably will start Velez on Wednesday, despite the fact that he came in and threw a dozen pitches on Tuesday, which, again, to me, the untrained baseball guy, seems a little bit odd. But what are you going to do? It's Stetson on a Wednesday. Just make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, they pitched probably more than they wanted to. Anyway, they pitched like 5 or 6 guys. I mean, J.C. Flowers, I mean, they probably weren't hoping to have to use him for a 4-out save. But, look, man, that just shows you every win. Look, Mike Martin coaches every game like it's in Omaha. He wants to win. I mean, he's very, very competitive. He's not about, like, punting on a game, a midweek game, just to, get his guys rest or whatever. He wants to win everything. And, but it also shows you how important these games all are. Like, it's a midweek April game against Stetson, and he's bringing in his closer in the 8th inning because he knows how vital it is to just kind of keep the good feelings going. Now they've won whatever. They've won 6 out of 7. They're up to 25 wins on the season, starting to feel good about themselves again. But holy moly, 13 errors in 4 games, and they're 3-1 in those 4.
Yeah.
And I looked it up. They've made 53 errors on the season in 39 games, which is absurd, especially because I think they had I want to go back and look. I think they had 3 errors after 10 games.
They were playing really good baseball defensively early on.
So definitely. In the last 29 games, they've committed 50 errors. It's impossible to be as bad as they are. And I don't know. I don't know. And I think baseball is the sport I know the most. It's certainly the one I played the most. And I help Brady the most at and try to coach him as much as I can. I don't know what it is. But the reason I think it might be something getting lost in translation with the coaching is because it's not like other guys have been good that they've thrown in the infield. The infielders keep changing. The results stay the same, as in bad.
Yeah.
And I don't know. You remember the game 1 they lost in the last time they were in Omaha with that crazy play where somehow Stephen Wells, who is a good outfielder, just has a single ground ball go through his legs. How does that happen? And then Cal Raleigh can't catch the ball, and they get 3 errors on 1 play and lose the lead. I mean, that's not something you can coach for. But I don't know. I don't know if they don't drill it enough, or maybe they don't make it important enough to the guys that play. Like Drew Mendoza, and I like Drew a lot. He's had a nice year at the plate. He's been coming on lately, and he's really good to talk to. His fielding percentage is .875. I mean, that's crazy. You have an infielder that has a fielding percentage under 900. I don't know that I've ever seen that before. But what do? Do you sit him? No, you don't want to do that because he's too valuable as a hitter. But you would think at some point he'd be like I said about Cabell with all the strikeouts. You would think these guys would get embarrassed and be like, man, I'm tired of throwing the ball to the sun. I'm tired of kicking it into the on-deck circle. I want to look like a real fielder again. And so that to me is just it's troubling because it's been this way for 7 years now. And this might be the worst of the bunch. They've had some bad defenses. We that follow Florida State baseball know a thing or two about bad defenses. This one might be the worst. They still win, though, so I don't want to take that away from them. They're like you said, you compare to the 14 Florida State football team. That's an apt comparison. Right now, they're winning in spite of themselves. What you wonder, though, is can it continue? And my guess is no if you're going to keep committing 3 errors a game.
Yeah, absolutely not. Because
your pitching isn't good enough to overcome 3 errors a game.
Yeah, I mean, I think this game also brought pitching back under the spotlight for me because I know I've been talking about the offense is what's been concerning me, the fact that they're not hitting the ball. But they hit the ball around the park on Tuesday night. I mean, some of the slugging numbers might be a little bit inflated because Matthew Nelson had a double that should have been a fly ball out, but the guy lost in the lights and it bounced and was the ground rule double. But 3 guys hit home runs: Reese Albert, Matthew Nelson, and who was the other guy that hit a home run? I think Salvatore might have hit a home run. I'll have to look it up. I promise I know my job. I was at the game. I was paying attention. Nico Baldor. Sorry, Nico. Just totally hosed you there. Nico hit a home run. But this further underscored just the problems they're going to have if Parrish and Van Eyck can't go 7 innings. I mean, I think Kwiatkowski can give you maybe two innings at the most. Scolaro is just Scolaro just doesn't have a lot of velocity on his pitches. He just throws just these junk curveballs that, Stetson couldn't catch up to or couldn't solve. But you figure, Louisville's going to sit back on and crank it out, or whoever they're going to get matched up with, which, by the way, I think before the weekend, D1 Baseball and Baseball America did their projections, and they had Florida State as a 3 seed in Athens. But that was before. Oh, yeah. That was before the series win, I think, up in Virginia, so that could change. Yeah. But, yeah, they're obviously they can't field like this because their offense, I don't think, is going to be consistent enough. And the pitching, God forbid, again, if Drew Parrish gets chased after 4 innings or Van Eyck can't make it out of the 2nd inning, I just don't know how they'll piece together. Crazy things do happen. Will Zierzows happen every now and then. But yeah, there's still some concerns, but we'll hope they figure it out. I did ask 11 after the game, like, are these midweek games that they do have left, are these sort of like the last opportunities for guys to make a case to maybe kind of break through? Because they got guys like, they got a guy like Cade Hungate, who was like the Virginia Gatorade Player of the Year, was an ace up there, batted like 600. And I don't think he's pitched since the Virginia Tech series, maybe the Boston College series. So but he said pretty much 11 said at this point, there's no situation they're not prepared for in terms of who they want to play, who they want to put in the game. And that, to me, that's a bit concerning because, I mean, if Grady's going to become the Sunday starter, if Drohan hangs on to that and Grady's your kind of, your fill-in patchwork guy, I mean, I don't know who else you have besides him. I was starting to think Haney was going to emerge, but Haney didn't do all that well on Tuesday night. And, I mean, JC is done well. I think JC now has the most saves, 10, since Billy Strode back in 12.
All right, JC.
So I just, it's, and I feel like at some point JC's going to get solved. I mean, he's been like a shutdown guy, but, those things never last that long. Why are you so
cynical?
But yeah.
So cynical. You're so cynical.
I am. I still think they're going to make it to Omaha, though. They're going to win it all somehow, right?
Wouldn't that be something? Hey, they're due to play some really good baseball. But again, we don't want to dismiss wins.
Yeah.
They won. It's what they were supposed to do. They're at 25 now when they were at 18 2 weeks ago or whatever it was. So, good for them. Oh. They're getting, and they got some timely hits when they needed it. They were 7-7, and then they got some doubles, and Robbie Martin had a big hit. So
yeah,
give them credit for that. They're starting to get good hits, and just you'd like them to field a little better, but what can you do? Hey, have you seen the guy on Jeopardy?
I saw like a 5-second blurb of his like final Jeopardy where he like risked $63,000 and he won.
That's insane.
He's like one of these. He's so cocky. He's like he writes his answer. Like what is Amadeus Mozart, and then under he'll be like P.S. Love you, Grandma. Like he's just like lapping the field and just laughing at everybody as he bankrupts Jeopardy and Merv Griffin Studios, whoever produces it. Yeah, it's amazing. Like he's Ken Jennings on steroids.
Yeah, because Ken Jennings won what everyone like 75 games in a row, but he was, and I thought he bid crazy. This guy, every daily double, he's betting $24,000. Like I guess thinking even if I don't know it, but he knows everything. He's like a supercomputer. But even if I don't know it, I still got time to rack up points enough for these scrubs, and I'll beat them anyway, even if I blow 30,000. He won $118,000 last night. And that wasn't even the most he's ever won on a show. Like that was what people would win in 10 days. It's crazy. Good for him though. Do you remember, by the way, you talk about cocky, do you remember the first guy that won the $1 million on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
Oh yeah, he knew the answer, but he called his dad, and they set the table, and then he's just like, Oh, Dad, no, I don't need your help. I just want to let you know I'm winning $1 million.
Yeah, I mean, that's the most cold-blooded, badass thing anybody's ever done on a game show.
Yeah.
I mean, that was crazy how and I've told you this. I had a buddy that was on Millionaire.
Oh, did you? You never told us this.
I did. It's actually the buddy that died, that passed away, that I was in New Orleans for to celebrate. He was on the movie edition, and I was his phone a friend.
Shut up.
I was, but I was one of them. He didn't use me. But it was also the movie edition, but he won $250,000. He got to the $500,000 question.
Oh, nice.
And he called my buddy's mom because it was a question about the West Side Story. And he obviously knew I wouldn't know it. It was an impossible question. But I'll ask it. I'll ask the people that are listening to see if they know, because they're like, I know the West Side Story. Well, no, I can't because it's multiple choice. Anyway, it was a rando. Early in the film, one of the Jets is talking to one of the Sharks. And I only know this because I looked it up later. One of the Jets is talking to the Sharks, and he's like, man, we're not scared of the Sharks. Remember what we did to the Hawks? Remember what we did to the Emeralds? We can crush these guys. And so anyway, the question was, which of these two great gangs is mentioned in the West Side Story? And Hawks and Emeralds was one of the choice, Vice Lords and Ospreys and all this. I mean, you had to actually know the dialogue. It wasn't like this long scene. It was literally a throwaway line at the beginning of the movie or play. So anyway, but my picture was right. It's actually on YouTube. You can look it up, folks. His name was Carlos Giron, Giron. You can look up Carlos Giron Millionaire, and it's on YouTube. And when he goes to his phone a friend, my face pops up.
That's fantastic. Yeah,
very quickly, very quickly because he didn't use me. But yeah, that was, and also what they did was they told me that morning before he taped. It's like, hey, you're Carlos's phone a friend, right? And I'm like, yeah, okay. Here's how it works. If you hear your phone ring, it's gonna be a New York area code. We want you to answer it on the second ring. Do not answer it on the third ring. We will hang up. Do not answer it on the first ring. It has to be the second ring. You answer. And that was basically it. So anyway, they call me. I get a phone call right when I know he's about taping, like 30 minutes into his taping. And it's from the New York number. And I'm like, oh, God, I'm about to be on national television talking to Meredith Vieira. This is going to be crazy. I wonder how much money he's won. But anyway, they just called me, and I go, hello. And they go, Corey? And I knew it wasn't Meredith Vieira. And I go, yeah. She goes, well, we just wanted to tell you that Carlos chose another phone a friend.
Oh.
And I'm like, oh. And I'm like, well, how's my guy doing? And she goes, oh, we can't tell you that. Click.
Oh.
So that was the end of it. But they called me to tell me they weren't using me, which for like 8 seconds, whatever that was, 4 seconds, I was. And what I was going to do, my plan was, I told them, I'm like, look, dude, there's no way they're going to ask a movie question that you would know that I don't, unless it's about Field of Dreams. So, but I can work a computer. So I will type very quietly as you ask me the question, and I can try to look it up. But he didn't use me, and Jason Braun's mom failed miserably, and he had to settle for the $250,000.
Oh, man. That's awesome, dude. Yeah, I never knew that. I don't have any game show thing. The only thing I did was when ESPN had that Dream Job reality show.
Oh, all right.
I went and tried out for it. I was going to school in Orlando. I was at UCF that year. I was like 18 years old or 19 years old, like freshman. But it was in Tampa at the Ice Palace or whatever they call it now, Amalie Arena. And, it was just – I remember just waiting in line, and then finally you get in there after like 2 hours and keep moving from room to room. And I remember they start you off once you finally get into the inner sanctum of everything. They give you an actual written test. And I remember the first question on it was, who is the head football coach at Florida State University? And I was like, oh, it's a sign. Like, this is my day. I'm going to get this. And I did that, and then after you took the quiz, they brought you into another room that had a bunch of little round tables, and they would randomly assign 4 or 5 of you at a table, and then they would frame you a topic and be like, go, and they would want you to all argue and debate it. And I had the biggest bunch of dolts at my table, and I remember one of them was just like, Bobby Knight, would you let your kid go play for him or not? I did the whole oh yeah, obviously I would, because I'm going to like Jimbo Fisher 10 years from now. And I'm all about a guy who's, about being rough and gruff and, will make your man or make your son into a man. But they ended up picking like two people from the Tampa one. One of them was like some 57-year-old housewife. And then I don't even know who the other person was. But that just lets you know that they were looking for, certain attributes that I did not possess, which was foreshadowing into my career later on. But that's neither here nor there.
Sure.
And yeah, this became a really long show because we have the whole segment with you and Gene. But before we get to that, breaking news that just came down here on Tuesday night as we're recording. Florida State just got their third commitment here in, I think, almost as many days nearly. A 6'2", 180-pound safety out of Sandalwood High School in Jacksonville by the name of Derek Bermudez. He is not on the star scale. He doesn't have any stars. Which means he's going to Florida State. He's a diamond in the rough. He's going to be awesome. If he was committing to Miami, you would laugh at them. But he's committed to Florida State, so that means Willie's got a great eye for talent, hashtag sleeper. But maybe we'll get Michael Langston on the show to talk a little bit about this commitment. But apparently he's been a target for other teams like Oklahoma, Auburn, and Florida. So also has 20 offers reportedly. So I don't know why Rivals is late on this, but we'll try to get you some background on it during Renegade Express on Thursday because there is some recruiting questions on there that we'll have to get to. Corey, also have your Jimbo to LSU, Texas A&M, AD leaving, hot takes ready to go because I think of the 6 questions that are in there right now, 2 of them involve that. So people are curious about that.
I mean, I do think that's a possibility, right? But yeah, I'll keep that in the holster for now. My thoughts on that, but all right. Well, that's exciting. I don't know about the 0-star safety, but you know what, folks?
Well, Tamorian Terry, I think, wasn't even ranked at some point.
He wasn't in the system. Devontae Freeman wasn't in the system when he committed to Jimbo. So, again, you'd rather get the 5-star kids that everybody wants. We get it. Than maybe kids nobody's heard of. But at the same time, that doesn't mean they can't play. Doesn't mean they can't. And you know what he's going to come in with, Aslan?
Chip on the shoulder?
A little chip on the shoulder.
Okay.
Little chip on the shoulder. You can't put a price tag on having a lot of chips on your shoulder.
Yeah. Hey, as we transition to the segment with you and Gene, if Rivals was around in 85, like would Dion have been a 5-star, do you think, or would he probably been like a 4-star?
I think he would have been a 4-star. I've read up on that a little bit and who was after him and everything. I think, I mean, his speed was unreal and everybody knew that. But I think back then, Sammy Smith is the one that was like the 5-star, super duper number 1 player in the country recruit, and he was good. I mean, he was the number 8 pick in the draft or whatever, and had a 1,200 yard season in '87. But I think Dion would have been one of those high 4-star guys.
Okay.
You know,
I agree. I think that's probably where he would have been.
That's what he wouldn't have been a Jalen Ramsey. He'd have been was Darby? Maybe Darby was a 4-star, I think.
Yeah, Darby was
somewhere in that ilk.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, that's Derek
Brooks would have been a 5-star. He was the USA Today Player of the Year.
Yeah, that'll qualify you for it. All right. With that said, here now, the founder and administrator of WarChant.com with over 30 years of institutional knowledge about Florida State. And the other guy on this podcast named Corey talking about the best recruiting classes in Florida State history.
And, something you and I have kind of batted around for about a week or so about coming up with the greatest all-time Florida State recruiting classes. And this thing's had a few iterations we've gone through. So just kind of tell us how we came about coming up with this list.
Well, it first started, the genesis of, which I wrote about, which you can see obviously on warchant.com, is guys from the 95 class and the guys from the 2000 class going back and forth on which class was better. And you're talking about guys like Corey Simon, Peter Warwick, Travis Johnson, Michael Boulware. I mean, there's some big-time names in those classes. And so when they were going back and forth about who was better, who was the best I don't even know if they were arguing about which was the best class of all time, but they were arguing which class was better. And I just thought it was really neat how, like territorial these guys are. They're all Florida State fans and they're all Florida State alums and they did great things, but they really are kind of territorial about their own classes and who they came in with. And ours is the best in school history or one of the best in school history. So it was really neat to kind of, it just kind of got the juices flowing a little bit about, man, it'd be kind of neat to go back and actually look up who is the best recruiting class in Florida State history. And the thing about Florida State, man, it's like Kentucky basketball. I mean, they're all really good, especially during that, 15 to 18-year run. They had some absolutely loaded classes. So, we just kind of wanted to go back and kind of do our own little research into which one, not, it's all subjective in the end, but I tried to make it a little more analytical and data-driven to see which one was actually which ones were the best in Florida State history. And like I say in the thing I wrote, man, even the ones that are even the 8th best class in Florida State history would be like the number 2 class or number 1 class at 90% of the schools in America.
Well, it's kind of, we first did this, I think you sent me your top 5, and I kind of sent a top 10, and we're not going to give anything away. I think outside of the number 1 class, we were a little bit off, but I think part of that issue is what you're talking about. It's a subjective nature of this thing, and, I think you came up with a good idea to try to quantify it. We went back and forth on that because and you wrote about it and I wrote about it at the end of your story, kind of a commentary about it's not the importance of the class because it's so hard to judge, and we can get into that a little bit. Some of those classes were really important, but really just kind of end up how many great players they had. And, I think you came up with an interesting system at first and it looked pretty good, but there were a couple anomalies. So we kind of tweaked that a little bit. And I got to give credit to Ira. Or credit is due. He said, hey, throw in the retired jerseys, guys, because then, the guys that are up there that should be the Charlie Wards, the Deion Sanders, the Marvin Jones,
right,
the Derek Brooks, those guys who really should be the all-time greatest players should be getting the most points in this system. So it did kind of work itself out.
And not to give anything away, because I think these are all classes that I write about that didn't quite make the cut. But like somebody like Jameis Winston, obviously he hasn't had his jersey retired yet, but he will. And I think he racked up 31 points, which is an enormous. I mean, that's the most. He's the most decorated player in Florida State history because what we did was we gave you 8 points for winning the Heisman, which is a lot, 7 points for any other national award. Although I didn't do that with Jameis. Like I didn't give him credit for Davey O'Brien. I just gave him the Heisman. I figured if you got the Heisman, that was enough. But then 6 points for being a consensus All-American, 5 points for being a first-round NFL draft pick, 4 points for being an All-American on some reputable list, 3 points for being a draft pick of any kind, and then 2 points for being a starter. So what I think it did was, obviously a class like 2012 has a lot of star power. Jameis was 31 of the 88 points or 85 points or whatever they were. But it didn't have maybe as the classes that are ranked ahead of it, those had a few more guys that really made an impact. It wasn't just so star-driven. Now, the ones that are at the top, they had a lot of stars, but they also had a lot of guys that, made some All-American lists or were draft picks, even if they weren't first-round draft picks. But I thought you made a good point because how it worked, and I don't want to give anything away, but there was a guy at Florida State in the early 2000s that won a national award and was really good and was a first-round draft pick. Well, it turned out with our scoring system, he had more points than Charlie Ward because Charlie Ward wasn't drafted in the NFL at all. And that's mainly because Charlie said, if you don't draft me in the first round, don't draft me. Or Chris Winkie was drafted in the 4th round, so he didn't get the first-round pick, so the first-round points. So the way we did it is like, okay, that guy that he was a very good player at Florida State. He wasn't in the same league as Charlie Ward, Marvin Jones, Deion Sanders. So we rectified that with the retired jerseys, and there's only 7 or 8, but that was a really good idea to make sure because those are the guys that really, really stood out at the college level. Like Warrick Dunn, obviously racked up a ton of points for his class, and Deion did for the 85 class.
And it's funny because I think if you want to look at just the importance, what are the most important classes in FSU history? And I think there's 3 that come to mind. I think you touched on a couple of them in your write-up, Corey. But none of those 3 made the top 5.
Right.
And I want to start with those, and let's start chronologically going all the way back and you brought this one up, and I give credit to you. You thought I'd be mad, but I was like, man, I'm glad you caught this. Was the 1977 class, going way back. But I mean, I didn't realize this, but you start looking at the names, and you're like, holy moly. And you got to remember, 3 of the next 4 years, Florida State had 10 wins.
Right.
And twice, I think, finished in the top 5 or close to the top 5. And you got to remember, I went back and looked. They never had a 10-win season before 1977.
Right.
And they never finished in the top 10. They did it, 3 times after, and it's all because of this class and those 2 big games against Oklahoma. And you got the Keith Jones, the late great Monk Bonasort was on there, of course, Ron Simmons, Rick Stockstill. I mean, it had a lot of the kind of the initial great players that we know of at Florida State.
For sure, and it was Bowden's first real class his first full class that he signed. And look, Florida State was, I don't want to call it an abject disaster, but it certainly wasn't one of the prominent football programs in the country. It wasn't relevant at all when Bowden took over. And then 4 years later, they're playing in the Orange Bowl. 3 years later, they're playing in the Orange Bowl. Well, this class had a huge role in that. And so, yeah, they didn't rack up the points because they didn't have a ton of NFL guys. They didn't have any award winners necessarily. But when you're talking about Monk Bonasort, Ron Simmons, Bobby Butler, I mean, I looked it up. They had 7 guys out of that class that ended up in the FSU Hall of Fame.
Wow.
And that's Paul Pierowski. I've never known how to pronounce that last name. So that's remarkable that Bowden did that in his first class. And I think what we looked at was, and I said it in the story too, most important, vital, valuable, those are all different metrics. Because again, I don't know if the dynasty happens. It definitely doesn't happen without the 1985 class. I don't know that it happens without the 77 class.
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden 1980 comes along and Florida State, people around the country know Florida State because of by and large what that class did and Ron Simmons was an enormous recruit in the history of Florida State football. So they had a good point value. It just wasn't as much as maybe the guys in the 90s because once they became a factory, they were getting the best players in the country and they were getting 8, 10 NFL players a year in the recruiting classes. Well, that all started, in my opinion, because of 77. And then 85, once they hit a little bit of a lull because of in the early 80s, it wasn't much of a lull. They were still winning 7 or 8 games, but they weren't the dynasty. And then, I know we'll talk about that next, but then the 85 class comes. And I think we both agree on this. I think that is the most important class that Florida State has ever signed.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely down with you on that, Corey. I mean, I wrote about that too. That's when we first came to the list. I think I had 85, whatever, like number 3 or something when I first came to the top 5. Because I was weighing in there. We didn't really have it quantify yet. We were just kind of like, okay, what's the most important? Kind of balance that with the players, which is really hard to do. So that's why I had it there because, I mean, it was, like you said, that, and I still think, it's people don't look back at the amazing run they had, the 14 years of top 5 finishes, because you put that in any perspective. Look at any other sport. What other sport has a team been that good for a decade and a half? The only ones I can think of in the last 50 years, maybe I'm missing 1 or 2, is I think North Carolina women's soccer and UConn women's basketball. Who else in the last 50 years has had any sport at any level been that good in the top 4 in everything across the board? And only one, and that's because of this 85 class. They're the one who set the stage for that amazing run.
Yeah, exactly. And and when you talk about most important recruits in Florida State history, I mean, I think Ron Simmons is up there, but I think Deion is the one, because not only was he awesome and a Hall of Famer and a great player, but people around the country, players around the country saw that. And saw the swagger and the way Florida State played, and he was a national brand before he was even out of college, and also they beget Terrell Buckley. Aslan and I talked to him maybe a couple months ago. Terrell Buckley is obviously on one of these teams too, but that he came to Florida State largely because of Deion. Well, then how many people came to Florida State because of Buckley? And then how many people came to Florida State because of Corey Sawyer, who came here because of Buckley? You know what I mean? Like it just feeds itself. But that all started with 85. It all started with that class with Deion and Sammy Smith and a couple other ones, Pat Tomberlin, guys like that.
Don't forget Odell.
Odell was in there. It didn't have guys that made an enormous impact or won a bunch of awards other than Deion, but it was a great class, and it was such an important class moving forward. Didn't win any championships, but it started that run. And yeah, we wanted to give them credit for what they were, but if you just look at it objectively, number of NFL caliber, all ACC or all conference, all Metro, whatever you want to do in the 80s, all caliber type players, big time players. The other classes in the 90s had more, but again, that's all back to that all goes back to what Deion and those guys started. They don't come to Florida State in 91 through 99 if Deion and that class doesn't do what they did.
It's interesting you mentioned the impact of Deion and people talking about him to this day. And we can ask Michael Langston about this. The defensive backs, they still mention to this day Deion Sanders. And I've never seen another player have that resonate that long with kids, because usually 2 or 3 years after they're done, or at least their NFL careers are done, they're relevant to kids. Because, I mean, heck, they're only I mean, they've only watched football for a few years. They're not that old. So to this day, the kids want to be the next Dion. When they tweet out, I got an offer from Florida State, they're putting a picture of Dion on there. I mean, it's amazing what he has done here, going all the way back to 85, which is, by the way, why it's also the greatest class ever, Corey?
Is that when you
That's
enrolled?
When I enrolled at Florida State, yes.
Did you have any classes with Dion?
No, my roommate did, but I did not get to have a class with Dion. So.
You didn't help him pass algebra that one year?
No, I missed that, unfortunately.
So, and the thing with Dion that's unique too is that, look, he was in that same draft class, the NFL draft classes, like Aikman, Barry Sanders. But you're right, like you don't hear running backs talk a lot about Barry Sanders, and like, you know what I mean? Like, oh, I want to be the next Barry Sanders. Barry Sanders is the best. I want to be him. Although he's the equivalent of Dion as a running back. He was incredible. But it's weird that, yeah, you're right. Dion, whatever, it's been 15 years since he played a game, is still that known. And now it helps that he's on the NFL Network and he makes himself known. But it's also, it's all he represents. Mm-hmm. The swagger, the hard work, the talk, the incredible athleticism. I mean, it was really, that is the guy that, I've always said Bobby Bowden is the most important person in Florida State football history. I would probably put Mickey Andrews second, and Deion Sanders has always been number 3. And I can't imagine how that would ever change, because we don't even know if Jimbo Fisher comes to coach at Florida State if Deion Sanders hadn't have been there 25 years before. I mean, that's how big an impact he had.
Yeah. And the last one of the ones that just missed the cut, but really probably in the top 3 in my mind of importance to the program, and this is obviously more recent, 2010. And again, you got to put it in context where Florida State was at prior to that.
Absolutely.
I mean, this is a team that lost 6 times in a row, been blown out by Florida. It was the end of the so-called lost decade. I don't know, was it Jeff Cameron or Tom that kind of coined that phrase? But whatever it was not a great time in Florida State football history when all that was going on. And then your coach, absent a Greg Reed return against Maryland at the end of that 2009 season, you probably have a losing season for Bobby Bowden's last year as head coach there. And then Jimbo Fisher takes over after being head coach in waiting, and he turns a really good recruiting class kind of out of nowhere and really turned the tide for that amazing run they had between 2012 and 14, and then obviously the national championship in 13. And these guys laid the foundations. They made it cool to go to Florida State game when LaMarcus Joyner, Telvin Smith, Jeff Luke, guys like that, or big-time recruits, came here. And then even a guy like Cam Irvin, who wasn't a big-time recruit, but boy, he balled out when he came to Florida State too. So it made all of a sudden the tide turned to Florida State, and then they dominated for the next 4 or 5 years in the state.
Yeah, it was a really big class. I think the difference maybe between it and 85 is the lasting impact, because now we are where we are. Obviously, Florida State carried that 1985 class and the success it had into much greater heights than this one ended up. This one plateaued really quickly. But for that run, that 3-year run that Florida State had, or you can call it a 5-year run. I mean, they did go to the Orange Bowl in 16. That all stemmed from the 2010 class. And again, you can look at the names, and like Christian Green, okay, he never really did much. Scooter Hagens never really did much. Jeff Luke transferred. But at the time, those were big names, and they were known names in recruiting circles, and all the kids in the 11 class knew those names. Mm-hmm. And they saw, oh man, we got five stars are going to Florida State like it's a fun thing to do again. Like, oh, they have their fill. Like, there's a ton of them coming to Florida State. And LaMarcus and Telvin get the most credit for it because they were the best players on the field out of that class. But yeah, it's even the Christian Greens and the Scooter Hagens and guys like, and Bjorn Werner obviously was very good too.
Was all right.
But that's why that was such a big deal. It wasn't so much and that's why they didn't quite make the cut, was because if you look at it as a whole, they didn't have it was really top heavy, but it was even the guys that didn't make an impact on the field made a real impact that you almost can't quantify. Much like the 85 class and the 77 class, you can't really quantify how big a deal that was for other players to see Christian Green, a 5-star kid, choose Florida State. And to see Jeff Luke, who I don't even know if he ever played it down at Florida State, certainly didn't play many. He was like the 30th player in the country.
Was a 5-star. I mean, he's another one that was up there.
Right, Christian Jones. Huge. Yeah, and Christian Jones has actually had a pretty nice NFL career, even though he wasn't drafted, and he started on a national championship team. So I shouldn't have forgotten him. But yeah, Christian Jones was a big deal, and Christian Green was a big deal. And you get and LaMarcus Joyner and Jeff Luke, and all of a sudden the kids in Florida and even the kids in the region, like say, for instance, a kid from Hueytown, Alabama that might be paying attention, they see, oh, okay, Florida State is on the rise again. And that made it – because remember, the 11 class that signed, a lot of those guys were committed before the season started, and then that season went off the rails for a little while.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
But they still stayed committed, and I think it's a lot to do with, man, they're really young, but they're really good. Look at that class they signed in 10. And we're going to add to that, and in 2 years we're going to be dominant, and it played out exactly how they thought it would. But, yeah, the 2010 class was a vital class. It was just for a shorter time period than the dynasty, but it sparked the dynasty. It was a big deal.
I know there's a fond place in your heart, Corey, for the 12 class just because of Jameis. Obviously, that made a huge difference for this program and, helped the run in 2013. But I still look at this 2010 class when I see LaMarcus Joyner and Telvin in there. I mean, those two guys were the heart and soul of that defense, that amazing defense they had that year that I think ranked number 1 or number 2 in most every category. You had Terrence Brooks and some other guys in there as well. So I think that kind of laid the foundation for the defense. Then Jameis came along, obviously Kelvin. Those guys, Freeman, came in the next couple classes, and so that obviously set the stage.
Yeah, and I don't think, if I'm remembering correctly, I don't think the 12 class is also one I mentioned in there. And you're right. But again, I think what it goes back to is who knows if a Mario Edwards or a P.J. Williams or a Jameis Winston, if they sign with Florida State without the 2010 class. You just don't know. You think they might have, but you just don't know. Just like you don't know if Buckley signs in '89 without Dion in '85. Like it's hard to kind of it's just hard to know. It's hard to predict. But that 2010 class, you saw what happened. They just built off it, and they started landing incredible classes because of, I think, that 2010 class. And I really, Jeff Luke, it's a really weird deal. Like because I think he might have been the first one to commit after Bowden resigned.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think he was.
It was either him or LaMarcus, but they were really close together, and that was really important in Jimbo Fisher getting off on the right foot as the head coach. Like they had just had their third 6-loss season in 4 years. It was a really kind of ugly end to the Bowden tenure because he didn't want to go, and he was essentially fired. It was just in Florida State was the punching bag for everyone in the national media saying, how can you treat him like this? So it was a really tumultuous time there for a couple of weeks in the transition. But before I think they even played West Virginia, I think Jeff Luke and LaMarcus Joyner had committed to Jimbo Fisher. Yeah, and I think Matt Elam might have too, but that's another story. but even still, that's a big deal. That's a really big deal in a tumultuous time like that, in a transition, for you to lock up 2 All-American type kids that quickly within a 2 or 3 day span, to tell the rest of the kids in that class and then in the next classes, man, this is the place to be. There's don't be scared about coming to Florida State. Things are about to turn because everybody back then, remember, Florida was flying high. I think that 2010 class that Florida had at the time, I think they ranked that as like one of the number one class, maybe one of the best classes in college football history. I remember that talk anyway. It didn't turn out to be so. Big time. It was a big bomb, but at the time it was all these 5-star recruits. That's what Florida State was dealing with. So to get their fair share, to beat Florida for a few battles, that was a big deal. And then obviously Urban Meyer quitting opened the floodgates the following year. But that 2010 class
I thought you
really
were
did
quitting during the FSU game.
Well, he did do that. Eddie Gran told Jimbo all about that. But yeah, he did kind of quit then, and then he quit. What did he quit? Did he quit that? Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
he quit right after that,
that was
right?
His last game against FSU.
Yeah, that was his second to last game ever. Right? Yeah, he lost to Florida State. Maybe that, man, I don't know. I don't want to pretend to know how Urban Meyer thinks, but he probably also was like, oh man, this isn't going to be nearly as easy as when the old man was coaching the team. No offense, I shouldn't use that as a pejorative. Bobby Bowden was great. Obviously, nobody's here. We're not having this conversation without Bobby Bowden. But still, I think that 2010 class and everything it represented really did set the stage for the second resurgence. Now we're just waiting for the third one.
And I think we'll talk about one of the classes that are right after this class here in your list without giving anything. But what is amazing, this class also started, when you just talk about personnel, that record streak Florida State had. I think it was between, whatever they had, 29 draft picks between, was it 2012, 2015, whatever that was, would set a record for a 3-year span.
Yeah,
and number
13,
of guys
yeah,
drafted.
2013 to
2015, 29 draft picks, and this is kind of the beginning of some of these guys you saw here for the next. So it's amazing. They had 3 classes that, regardless of the rankings, in terms of, you want to just look at NFL guys panning out. When you're putting you're putting half your guys you get in a class and you're putting them into the NFL, that's unheard of. Nobody hits at that high of a percentage rate, which tells you not only were they recruiting well in the star rankings, and Jimbo Fisher and that staff did a great job with evaluation and then obviously developing guys for both college and the next level.
But what happened, Gene?
I think that's a topic for another discussion, Corey. We'll have to have it another time. So. I don't want to even go down that path.
Right.
We'll be here for a while, but we got some. So we'll be slowly. We're not going to give it to you all at once. We're going to little by little start with number 5. The story right now is up there. We talk about some of these classes that just missed the cut and kind of the thought process. But then probably later this week, or worst case, maybe early next week, we'll start going from 5 down to 1, and we'll try to do this again, Corey, on some of these and to go a little bit more in depth on some of these top 5 classes of all time. So, but in the meantime, if you need more of this, there's always Wake Up War Chant. I think you and Aslan, you got the Atlanta Seminole stop coming up Wednesday night. Will you guys going to do a podcast after that?
For sure, yeah. We might even do one tonight. I'm not sure, but we'll definitely do one after that. Yeah, absolutely. See what old Willie had to say.
Okay, great. So yeah, if you're in Atlanta, go by, say hi to Corey S. Clark.
Top Golf. The Top Golf in Alpharetta, yeah.
Yeah. So you going to play this time, Corey?
No, man, I can't do that to myself. People will be there.
If I had it, golf, it's okay.
No, I would literally somehow hit someone. I would hit it sideways or behind me.
Hit somebody with a golf ball. Maybe it's a Top Golf.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Night in Alpharetta. Should be a good time. Thank you, Corey Clark, senior writer, warchant.com. Good stuff. And I know we're all going to be looking forward to the top 5 all-time FSU recruiting classes.
Warchant.com is the ultimate inside source for FSU football and recruiting. And now you can get in on the action for free for an entire month. Warchant.com is offering a risk-free 30-day trial subscription. Get full access to the #1 website covering the Seminoles just by entering the promo code WARCHANT30. That's WARCHANT30. Sign up and get in on the world's most active FSU message boards. Receive breaking news, stories from our award-winning staff, plus get exclusive interviews and videos. Just enter the promo code WARCHANT30. Warchant.com, your ultimate Seminole sports source.